So thanks very much, Tracy, and good afternoon to you all. To avoid confusion, I'm Mike Stone, and I'm delighted to welcome to the days this afternoon Terry Halvorsen from Samsung. Now, those of you who've had even the briefest glimpse at the bios that were on the app will have realized Terry and I were both the CIOs of our respective Department of Defense and Ministry of Defense. And over the years, we've worked very closely indeed together on a whole range of issues. And one such issue was keeping a very clear view on the radar screen of the technology environment and being aware of the disruptive technologies that were coming towards us so that we could pick them up early, gain first mover advantage, and stay a step ahead of our enemies. Well, on that radar screen, the most disruptive technology that we could see was 5G. Now, roll forward 3 years, and we're in very different roles than we were before, but we would say that the 5G revolution is almost upon us. In fact, we would say it is upon us. And we believe that 5G, along with its associated ecosystem, which includes AI, is going to be truly revolutionary, and particularly in the enterprise space. Now, why is that? Well, you might say, surely this is just the next evolutionary step from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5G. Well, no. As we heard yesterday from Peter Diamandis, this is the first of the truly exponential steps. You know, 4 times 4, 16, not particularly interesting. 1 million times 1 million, 1 trillion, very interesting. And this is the very first of those truly exponential steps that is going to power that curve perpendicular. Secondly, this is going to be a revolution that is really unlike 2, 3, and 4G, going to be driven by enterprises rather than the consumer. So it will be enterprise-led. We see it as actually the fundamental enabler of Industry 4.0, in which the sensors and actors in equipment will be intercommunicating and also communicating with the individuals so that we're really going to get very near real-time decision support. And it's perfectly possible today, and I mean today, to put in place campus rollouts of private 5G networks around geographically contained areas like factories, hospitals, universities, you name it, things that are geographically contained, ports, airports, etc., and we can do that today. So, I don't think anybody who knows us would ever say that Terry and I are given to hype, but both of us really truly believe that 5G is going to be nearly as revolutionary in the enterprise space as the railways once were. And to unpack that, what I'd just like to do is to ask Terry, why is it going to be so revolutionary?
So like we can talk about, and you'll see on the slides, all the things everybody talks about in 5G. Is it going to be faster? It's going to be multiple times faster. Today's 5G is running at 1 gig per second. By the end of this summer, it'll be running at 2.5 gig per second. It'll be at latency that's at 0.5 or lower, and the density of devices will be amazing. I mean, you will be able to connect 1 million devices to a network. But I think what's really going to be revolutionary about this is what it's going to do to compute. In its own way, because you're going to be able to link all these devices and you're going to be able to have the power of multiple computers in your hand, we're going to commoditize supercompute. This is going to really revolutionize and lower the cost of compute. And I think that will be one of the single biggest revolutions that we'll have. It's also going to change our economies. For the first time, you're going to be able to have factories, companies, countries really leapfrog technology and do it where it produces much more mission and business effect at lower cost. That's also going to be quite possible with 5G. But that's nice that we talked about the statistics. Mike, what do you see? How's it going to roll out?
Yeah, and what Terry's saying there, I think, apart from a bit of a hype phrase, but we are entering the era of hyper-converged connectivity in all of this, where everything's connected. So how do we see it rolling out? Well, we see it in 3 waves. The first wave is going to be around those campus rollouts, around geographically contained areas, as I said. And that's going to happen, as you can see on the bottom axis here, during the period from now through to the 3 years. And then, starting at year 2, we're going to begin to see real city rollouts. And actually, by the end of 20, we're expecting to see 20 carriers beginning to roll out. In fact, some of them will have rolled out 5G in a number of areas. And by the end of 21, we're expecting that most of the major cities in the developed world will have 5G available to them. But it won't be until much later before we get universal rollout. And the key thing about 5G and the campus rollout piece of this is that it doesn't need universal rollout for us to be able to make use of it within enterprises. And as you can see, very, very conservatively, we believe that this is going to unlock at least 4.3 trillion of new value in the economy. Now, over the course of the last couple of days, Terry, we've heard lots about data, and clearly data is going to be at the heart of this revolution as well. Why do you think that is?
Well, for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, I think if you read many of the economists today, you look at the news, everybody will tell you data is our most valuable asset. It's replacing oil, it's replacing, precious minerals. When I tell you on our best day, you're only using 25% of your most valuable asset, that's a pretty low return. And that's on your best day. Defense, medical, big business, we're only using about 25% of the data that we actually collect. Rest of it becomes digital waste. With 5G and the ability now to have AI be part of that, and some of the things, we're going to be able to grow the value of that data so that we're starting to use maybe 60 to 70% of that data. That's going to unleash things that we can think about today and unleash some things that we haven't even thought about today. You're also going to be able to have some options with that data that we cannot do today. You're going to be able to slice it in real time, and you're going to be able to do it wherever your business or mission is, right at the edge. That's the other big part of the data structure that's going to change. We today have an architecture that really tries to work things back to a center point for processing. You're going to have that data processed at speed at the edge, and you're going to send answers back, not send the questions back, which is going to let you have a much faster return on that data investment at wherever your business point or mission point meets the customer or the threat force. That's the big next step with the 5G and the ability to take that data and increase the value. But 5G is going to require a little bit about a new ecosystem.
Yeah, so it isn't just 5G. The fact is that there are a number of other technologies that are maturing at just the right time to be able to exploit the capabilities of 5G, be made stronger by 5G, but at the same time make 5G itself more capable. As I've said, this is all about data. That's why the cloud is on here. But 5G is the key to really unlocking some of these other technologies. Augmented intelligence, as I prefer to call it, rather than AI, is going to allow us to be able to reason over this new tsunami of data that's going to be unleashed and provide near real-time decision support. We've got the advances in IoT, which are leading already. We're beginning to see predictive maintenance happening, where kit is only coming in for maintenance when that part of the equipment tells us that it needs to be maintained, rather than the whole assembly having to come in. But some great advances in that space. Then there's the whole area of robotics, whether that's robotic arms in industry or in healthcare. But we've then got the drones, both aerial, land, sea, and subsea, which are both enabled by 5G, but also make greater use of the whole thing. And then finally, there's the whole area of augmented reality, the ability to be able to put an overlay on the real world and to be able to see it. Now, that is truly going to be enabled by the speed and low latency of 5G. But this is only really important if we can have it secure, because the end game has to be that the sensors and actors in an industrial setting can intercommunicate and make decisions independent of humans. But we can only be sure of that if there's been no malicious code injected. We need to be clear that the outcome we're going to get is the outcome we expected. And therefore, having a security wrapper around this is absolutely vital, which is why we talk about secure 5G. And linked into that is what Terry mentioned, the whole concept of edge compute. So going forward, as of January next year, what you have in your phone, you'll be able to have a terabit chip in there. Something the size of a laptop will have 10 terabits, maybe even 15 terabits, which will allow us to be able to process data on the edge and only pass back to the central cloud the results. Think of that in a university setting, for instance, where research has to be done on huge amounts of data. And it's either going to clog up the network or it has to be done out of hours, as it were. Well, now we're going to be able to parse that data on the edge and only pass back the results of that. Terry, the security angle of this is all important. I mean, can you unpack secure 5G a bit more for us, and also perhaps give us a clue as to where Samsung's going in relation to that?
So a couple things. Remember we talked about the speed. So today, one of our problems with securing the networks is if you tried to use the security tools that exist today, you pay too high of a bandwidth tax. It may take you 70, 75 megabits per second of bandwidth to do that. If you're on a 100 megabit system, you're not going to like the results of that. It slows everything down. If, however, I'm on a gigabit per second system, and as we said in the fall, we'll be at a 2.5 gigabit per second system, I can afford that 150 gigabits per second security tax. You'll see no operational deficiency. The user, it's well within the tolerance levels for the human mind even to recognize. The second thing that this is letting us do as we architect the network. Today, most threats work on one common flaw in the systems, and it's the operating system. Operating systems, I don't care which one it is, it's Microsoft, Apple, Linux, Unix, pick an operating system. They've all been studied in depth, they all have flaws. They account today for, in the cybersecurity world, 27 of the 28 most critical vulnerabilities. The system that we'll use to secure the 5G system does not have an operating system. That does three things for you. Immediately, it eliminates the 27 of the critical threat pathways. But operating systems also can't actually do parallel compute, step by step. As we've put the non-operating system security process in place, we have multiplied the ability to process the data on average 5 to 10 times faster than we can in any other system, which also gives you quicker access to the data, but also improves the security. The way you can run crypto on a 5G network also gets some interesting benefits. And there's a lot of discussion about whether we're at quantum, near quantum. Let's just say we're at near quantum. On a 5G network, the way you can set that up, you can actually near quantum proof your network and your security. And here's probably the killer thing. You can do that at cost. We will flip the economic model of cyber right now. Right now, nation states, big companies, we're losing the cyber economic battle. I can sit in a Starbucks connect to the wireless with a halfway decent laptop and a pathway into the dark net and about $10,000, it takes me about an hour and a half to go in and really wreak havoc on somebody's systems. This will change all that. Once you're on a 5G, you are going to eliminate that couple, maybe the first 35, 40% of the cyber hackers, and it will take somebody very dedicated who's willing to spend quite a bit of money to get into the systems that are protected by a 5G-enabled security system. But that takes a new way of thinking.
Actually, before you go there, Terry, I think what's important to understand that the way that is going to be set up and engineered is through parallel processing in field programmable gate arrays. So that will be emulating all of the operating systems and allowing us to do that in parallel. And we believe is going to give us a 2 to 3 year leapfrog in the cyber arms race.
Yeah, so I was going to go quite into the technical piece because a lot of people will say, well, FPGs are slow. They are if you use today's current way to build them and process them. What we have done is, using all the things we talked about with 5G, is increase the ability for them to process the data, and also did a hybrid so that while you've got them silicon-based, we can address them and modify them in software while they're working. That is a key issue that had to be solved for us to do that. That is revolutionary in itself.
What about the geopolitical issues that there are in the security world at the moment in relation to 5G?
Well, as everybody knows, it's hardly any interest of all to anybody. We're not having much issue there. But I'm going to stay off that and just say this. What 5G will give to people when they ask is data sovereignty. And that's data sovereignty at the country level, the company level, and the individual level. What I mean by data sovereignty, the way a good 5G system is networked, you can keep the keys to that system and still get that security. You don't give up your keys. Most systems today, when you load them, I don't care if you're right, somebody gets access to the keys that's outside of your system. The same thing at the government level. 5G will let us, the way we've architected that, deliver data sovereignty, and it will absolutely increase the privacy levels for everybody from companies to citizens while allowing them to share the data in the way that they want to and keep the speed and the ease of applications in process. I mean, I think one thing you have to remember, and I do this a lot, you go out, you lecture people about how bad their security is. So one of the things we like to pick on real quick, how many people have ESPN on their app? Ask that question, you find out a lot of people do, and they don't know they've given up their email, their microphone, their recorder, and they won't change it because it changes the speed at which they get that app. With 5G, you're going to be able to give that control and not change the speed at which they have to get that app.
Right, I talked a little bit about use cases earlier on, and because we're a bit short of time, I'm not going to bang on about that very long. But Bosch, for instance, are seeking to achieve $1 billion a year in additional revenue through the implementation of 5G in their factories. Volkswagen, Audi, VAG are also looking to implement this in the sort of campus rollout that we've talked about along the way. And when you hear people talk about 5G, generally speaking, they start to talk about it from a consumer perspective, i.e. you'll be able to download a movie in 3 seconds rather than 3 minutes. Actually, what's more important is what's the impact it's going to have in the enterprise. And a good example of this is the milling of a turbine blade. That can take up to 15 hours. And you can have an issue at the 14th hour and have to go right the way back to the beginning. The fact that 5G has less than a millisecond of latency will allow the machine to recognize that there's a vibration or something that's occurring before the issue has occurred and be able to stop the machine and prevent having to rework. So the sorts of things that can come from this are enormous in terms of economic value. Terry, what do you see as the main challenges, though, in implementing 5G?
Thinking. It is going to, you have to change the way you think about your network. Today we are, as we talked, we're on a central system where we want to put all the data in a central point. We don't want to keep that data at the edge. Matter of fact, we've all been trained over the years not to put that data at the edge. That's got to change. You're going to keep data at the edge. You're going to do it securely. So you've got to think differently about your network architecture, and you've got to think differently about the way you're going to employ the applications. They will be different, and we're going to change the whole device cycle. We really will be a more mobile environment all the time. I mean, as Mike said, so I have the latest phone in my pocket that's not quite on the market yet, but I have over 1 terabit of storage on it, fastest processor that's out there, and I don't touch my laptop or tablet much anymore, and you can project this now on any screens. It's just going to really change all of the thoughts we have about how do you work in that environment, and it's going to be really disruptive to current business because of what it frees up in terms of data. So mobile cars, everybody talks about that. We're going to have assisted cars before we do that. But one of the things we know from lots of study, you get assisted cars, particularly on highways in the US, it's going to be about a 75% drop in accident rate. That is going to throw all of the accident tables and insurance into disruption. And that's just a little disruption. You might have some other thoughts.
Well, in terms of opportunities, I think we have got to look at this, as you said, with completely different mindsets. There are going to be use cases for 5G that we cannot even possibly begin to imagine at the moment. You give people new capabilities and they come up with entirely new ways of doing this. But what we need to be clear about is that we need to be planning now. Even if you're not going to implement something for a couple of years, you need to be thinking about how you're going to make the most of 5G and the opportunities that we've brought out from this. Because it is real, it is upon us, it is going to have a revolutionary impact. Terry, have you got any final thoughts you want to give before we open up for questions?
In 26 seconds or less. Money is moving already in 5G. China just announced another $750 million per year on 5G investments. I spent last week in Europe. Many of the European countries are now making major investments. The US is starting to roll that way. You're going to see the money move, and if you're not planning now, you're going to be left behind. And we do know that the companies, the countries, the governments that get to 5G first are going to get an unbelievable economic advantage as they move forward. And this is one time where that first mover is really going to play heavy.
So if the move from 4G to 5G is a huge leap forward, the leap to secure 5G, which is what we are seeking to take to market, is going to be a further leap forward beyond that. We tend to overestimate how quickly technology comes towards us in the early days, and then underestimate how quickly it's coming as it happens to be close. And I believe that if we're not careful, we'll really underestimate this. Anyway, we've now got just over 4 minutes for questions, and we wanted to save some time to allow you in the audience to interact with us.
Thank you so much. Do we still have time for questions? I just want to... Oh, very good. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you so much.
3 minutes 57 now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Not that we're watching.
Great.
Yeah, that was very good. Thank you. As we start to really get closer to this, there's a lot of discussion and concern around the infrastructure requirements, especially in the U.S. and Western Europe, given the bandwidth and the spectrum constraints that this part of the world has, especially compared to what the wide latitude China has with its spectrum. What is the world going to look like when you're operating on such a high frequency that you have to have antennas every, I don't know how close they have to be, but, my understanding is you have to have a lot of them. And they don't penetrate buildings. They don't go very far.
Yeah.
And is there going to be a rural-urban divide in terms of accessibility to 5G?
Okay, so we're going to pay you later because that was the perfect question to ask. So,
Well done, Cliff.
so the answer is, first of all, there's already a rural and city divide. Look at this country, look at Europe, already have that. Couple things I think really you need to know about 5G. The size of the infrastructure is a whole lot smaller. You don't need towers with 5G. You're not going to need the big antennas. A big 5G antenna can be installed by one person, and it's actually an antenna array that has 10,064. The smaller antennas go anyway, you can glue them on sides of buildings. They are small enough that, yes, you'll need more of them, but they're a lot less expensive to deploy. As far as the frequency range, certainly physics applies. If I use some of the higher frequencies, I'll get a little less distance. But the good news about 5G, I can use 5G in a range from 300 up to about 40 megahertz, and it still works. What you are going to see is 5G systems that are multi-frequency. That's coming, and it's coming pretty quickly, where you're going to have dual frequency chips. That's really good in business, and it's fantastic in the military because it gives you some options. That's really good. So I don't think the infrastructure is going to be the slow point here. I think it'll roll out based on the monetary gains and the efficiencies of business. But it is going to be different from 4G. It's going to roll out based on government and big business. And I don't think the frequencies are going to be limiting. China's got the same frequencies actually that we can use. People say, well, they have access to more. Yeah, maybe it's because they're not using as much in some places, but the world economies will drive where that goes. And right now, most of the companies are already planning multiple capabilities. We operate in Samsung already in 6 of the big frequency groups, so does Ericsson. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. You hear a lot about the 5G won't penetrate things. 5G will penetrate as well as or better than 4G, and if you tack Wi-Fi onto that, you get even more for less money. So I think a lot of that is going to get better quickly.
So there's quite a lot of myth about that, particularly that rain and leaves get in the way. But to address the wider point about China, there is a perception that China is well in the lead in relation to 5G. That isn't actually the case. It is a perception. The only truly end-to-end 5G network anywhere in the world at the moment is actually in Korea. But unless we act rapidly and decisively, that perception will turn into reality. And let's be clear, what China is seeking to do is to become the dominant force so that we are no longer in the West. Have the political lead, as it were, in this space.
Mike Stone, Terry Halvorsen, thank you so much. This was great.